Women's and Gender Studies at Nassau Community College, New York. She is proud alumna of Allahabad University, India, where she did her post-graduation and secured her PhD. She served in her alma mater as lecturer in English literature for a short period of time. Her enchanting career in academia spans over 3 decades of rich teaching and research experience in various prestigious institutions. Some of the names include Pace University, White Plains, New York, Stony Brook University in New York, Western Connecticut University, Danbury, Westchester Community College, New York, University of Hartford, Connecticut. She has been a member of the Hutton House Lecture Series from 2002 to present. Her insatiable interest in Hindu Tantra, world religion and mythology led her to publish 2 books, Absent Mother God of the West, A Kali Lover's Journey into Christianity and Judaism, published in the year 2016, and In the Beginning of Is Desire, Tracing Kali's Footprints in Indian Literature, published by India Log Publications, New Delhi in February 2004. She has also published a number of articles in various reputed journals around the world. She writes a blog called Stand Under Mother Principle. She had been member of IAPL, that is International Association for Philosophy and Literature, from 1996 to 2012, and AAR, that is American Academy of Religion. An educator of English, a fluent speaker of Bengali and Hindi language, and with a working knowledge of classical Sanskrit, is here to enlighten our participants on traveling beyond the self, English as a global lingua franca. Ma'am, we request you to enlighten our participants with your talk. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Rizwana, for this rather extensive and very kind introduction. So I thank you and I thank the college for this invitation. I'm not sure how you will take. I decided, since you suggested by looking at my blog about travel. So since I am mainly a scholar of literature, religion, philosophy, so I'm going to focus on the aspect of traveling beyond the self as an expansion of the self through language, as well as a kind of expansion of the self and the dissolution of the self in the process. Because my own journey as a diasporic scholar who left India more than 3 decades ago, it has probably created my own persona as a scholar and a teacher. And of course, I ended up accidentally in the world of religion. So I'm going to focus on that. So let me get my presentation and see if it works to check this. Window. Okay, so can you see the screen now? Hello? Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, all right then. So here actually I'm invoking in the image the travels of the Buddha. So that's the image you are seeing here. And whenever I speak, I try to learn a little bit about my audience. So I looked at your website and I was quite happy to see your principles message. So the non-native speakers of English who are trying to understand this global language and participate, is probably good to look at that message, because I found that quite inspiring. That about education, the views are actually left over by the past rulers, the British, whose aim was not the development. And also, there was no emphasis on quality consciousness that the principal very astutely recognizes, and this mad rush after degrees and how that has actually harmed. And what he uses the word, our personalities got ramshackled. And all the rich ancient legacy collapsed miserably. So I'm going to invoke that ancient legacy also in conjunction with travel. So how to really develop this system, understanding of language without compromising on quality, and the transfer of knowledge and skill to the next. Skill is very important, and since I didn't get to listen to the other talks, I only caught the last few minutes of Dr. Niam's talk. Probably discuss the skill. I'm not going to focus on the skill aspect. And yes, it is important for employment and economic independence. But the last words in the message, that we need to develop human values such as compassion, love, reverence, and tolerance. So it's a important aspect. So the question is how to forge a learning of the global language without sacrificing that rich ancient legacy and develop a different focus. So here we are. I'm invoking a book by David Crystal, English as a Global Language. So we need to embrace English. We need to understand, learn without harm to the native tongues. The other thing we need to understand that this global lingua franca is a bridge, not a mansion. As a literature professor, I like metaphors. So a bridge is just to pass through, not to get stuck in it. And it's extremely important to understand the background from where we learned this language. So here's a quote: the British Empire may be in full retreat with the handover of Hong Kong, but from Bengal to Belize and Las Vegas to Lahore, the language of the sceptered isle is rapidly becoming the first global lingua franca. So the imperial background is very, very important. It is the current lingua franca of international business, education, science, technology, diplomacy, entertainment, radio, seafaring, and aviation. But then, is that all? There is something more to language than its use value. So the question I'm raising, can we use the language to go beyond its reach? And by reach, if you, again, I will invoke a little bit of history here. If you think about the time when Shakespeare was writing, and this reach was very, very small, but it is rooted in that cultural history. Since I also study cultures of the world, and understanding of cultural materialism is important for me. So in this article, it actually tells us this the reach of English at that time. In the art of English poesy, the creative writers advise that one form of English is more highly regarded than all others. In consequence, one should follow the usual speech of the court and that of London and the shires lying about London within whatever miles and not much above. So now think about it. It was a very small circle. And then, of course, the circle began to expand with the colonial history and everything, and so many different kinds of Englishes arose. So we need to see both the word English and global differently in today's world. And the mission of your college also gives priority to the education of scheduled tribes as well as socially disadvantaged students, and to promote awareness on ecological and environmental issues. So this is very interesting. Today, we live in a very, very different world. And this focus on ecology, understanding who are truly socially disadvantaged people and how we can serve them, use a language, of course, in some ways, a burden on the culture, but we could turn it into a gift, which we have done quite effectively. So this is where I'm looking at this, how English teachers, we have inherited both a burden and a blessing. So we need to understand that as we develop, this language and so there is this very powerful paradox, this colonial heritage and access to global power. Now, this is one of earliest things that we need to realize so that we do not fall into the traps, which I will keep talking about, because there are many traps within this expansion of language. So this is the earliest idea. The natives must either be kept down by a sense of our power, or they must willingly submit from a conviction that we are more wise, more just, more humane, and more anxious to improve their condition than any other rulers they could possibly have. This is a quotation given by Gauri Vishwanathan in her book Masks of Conquest. So the language and education system that the imperial British, administrators imposed on us was not innocent. Very important to recognize that. So the global ideology of oppressive power is also inherent in that transmission, which has actually brought us to this point, of course, this pandemic, and which is forcing us to reevaluate that unconscious ideology, which is much broader, and that is what I want to focus on a little bit more, because this colonizing modernity, which has been such an important aspect of human development in many ways, but at the same time, modernity as a Euro-American provincial ideology of progress, where the past is antiquated, we cannot accept that, because we cannot, as your principle says, the ancient legacy was destroyed. So it is atheistic, reductive materialism, which has been universalized, and the feminized earth and the native people are othered under that. So that it's important to recognize what is behind the language also. So capitalism, instrumental rationality, Eurocentric colonial powers, so all these are part of that system. These have brought forth both incredible machines and the time of the Anthropocene, a new geological marker, and the planetary crisis. So how do we use this global language without falling in the traps of that ideology? And now, so think about it. Who tells our stories? I'm very fond of Michael Wood, the storyteller, who is a Englishman, some of the videos I have used in my classes, the story of India, is a wonderful, wonderful scholar, and they're wonderful video. These are the stories told by people who were, actually part of that colonial heritage. And the use of language can be used to communicate a different reality. So in today's hyper-connected world, teaching of English must be done with full awareness of its history, but without recrimination. It's not a blame game. We have also benefited from the language, because that's the language I'm speaking to right now, language my children speak. So we have to look at the language objectively, but at the same time be aware of its background. And that, of course, since I mentioned Masks of Conquest by Gauri Vishwanathan, I'm just going to mention that it is important for the teachers to know the history of Imperial English, but skillfully use the language and literature to introduce a world beyond one's narrow identities. So this is the philosophical aspect that I'm going to develop in a little bit later. So, however, in today's India, decades after independence, we need to stop blaming the British, now a small island country, and see structures of domination within the self, the different kinds of ideologies that arise. So this is something from Gauri Vishwanathan, and she says that the work draws upon the illuminating insight of Antonio Gramsci, writing on the relations of culture and power, that cultural domination works by consent and can and often does precede conquest by force. So we need to understand the internal dynamics of culture also, how English teaching has affected our internal system of domination. Also, it has created hierarchies, created different structure of domination. So we need to reclaim a compassionate power based on deep diving into the mind, technologies taught by Indic mind sciences that are now globally available to people. So, and this is the part where our dialogue of colonization has brought us, that we cannot teach English without recognizing that we are also trying to use the language to decolonize ourselves from these structures of that domination. So Professor Spivak now uses the word that post-colonial is an empty word, because we have fallen into traps of our internal hierarchies also. So we need to understand that education denied. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? I hear some noise in the background. Okay, so in order to use, yes, hello?
Yes, ma'am, please continue. I have muted the participant.
Okay, all right. So since you are talking about how to help the disadvantaged scheduled tribes that the college is close to, so we need to understand what Spivak has been saying, that we actually internally in India, through our caste and gender hierarchies, we have denied the right to intellectual labor to all these people, many of our neighbors. So, and she says that she wants to teach whom we have damaged, not the, she also says that colonialism was only yesterday. So the structures of domination that we have created ourselves, we need to dismantle. And that's what I mean by going beyond the self. So again, I won't go too much into it. But she talks about various methods of how we can do that. Okay, so this brings me to my own college and understanding of English language, and when we are trying to learn the language, some of the things are hard for native speakers. For example, even though I have been speaking this language for a long time, the use of articles, we are almost notorious that native speakers, especially Indians, who do not have articles in their own languages, and they do not know. So I'm just going to tell you a story here that my English professor, Dr. Manas Mukundas, since you did invoke my alma mater in the introduction. So this is an interesting anecdote that he wrote in an article about Allahabad University trees, architecture, and so there was a legendary professor and problem of grammar that non-native speakers face. Again, I'm not going to go into the skill, I'm just telling you a story that how a skilled professor uses even an error in speaking to do something expansive. So an undergraduate student, I'm just quoting from his article, not quite sure of where to use articles, asked the professor, "Please, sir, what is time?" The professor, delighted with the profundity of the question, sat him down beside him, launched a long soliloquy on time and space, and concluded by offering him tea. So the reason I'm giving you this example, that how this professor, instead of correcting this particular thing, made use to tell the students something so much faster than simply a dropped article. So, and this is the understanding of a university. A university, because it is a fraternity of teachers and students, and it is not a knowledge market. It's very, very important to understand it, especially in today's world, where we are nothing but consumers of knowledge. We have been turned into nothing but consumers. So vital to understand that a skilled teacher can use even errors. Not that we shouldn't learn the right article, that's a purpose of grammar, but there are many different ways to teach the non-native speaker of various ways of expanding our self. And we need to create visions beyond the buildings. So here I'm invoking again Dr. who wrote that the British Empire gave the university magnificent buildings and grounds to impress the subject nation with a show of opulence and grandeur and pretense of concern for its welfare and development. It did not give the universities worthy visionary goals, even if some of it came in through the back door. Very, very important. Again, my university, it was an absolutely magnificent building, and I was very, very fortunate to have incredible professors. And then, and of course, in order to go beyond that decolonization, we'll have develop a global vision of a planetary life that is not based on elitist values. Unfortunately, those elitist values still operate in many of our colleges. So that's why I'm invoking Paulo Freire's work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and changing the system of education from what he called the banking system of education and towards a pedagogy of hope. So my alma mater's motto, as many branches that many is which invokes the Akshayavada, a mythical tree of immortal wisdom, actually came from an Englishman, Professor J.G. James, who designed it and understood the importance of sitting under a tree and learning. Of course, sitting under a tree that's how the Buddha, discovered something so deep, the so-called, Bodhi and enlightenment. So that is something which is vitally needed today. And why is it needed? Because we have created oppressive structures everywhere. Now, since I have been teaching in the United States for more than 30 years now, I have learned a lot from how imperial English must be deconstructed. And for that, I'm invoking here James Baldwin. So having an incredibly diverse classroom in a community college has taught me about the use of language, power, and communication. So at a time when the struggle for Black Lives Matter has been intensified, I want to recognize the depth of Baldwin's insight about language in this 1979 essay. So here's a quote from him, from this essay called "If Black English Isn't a Language, Then Tell Me What Is." The reason I'm creating this comparison with non-native speakers in India is that, again, disadvantaged people, they use language, they understand how language also is power. So he writes, language incontestably reveals the speaker. Language also far more dubiously is meant to define the other. And in this case, the other is refusing to be defined by a language that has never been able to recognize him. And people evolve a language in order to describe and thus control their circumstances, or in order not to be submerged by a reality that they cannot articulate. This is something very, very important. When we are imposing a language on people who are already disadvantaged, or they think that if they do not know this global language of power, their identities are not respected. So this is where, Baldwin comes very, very handy and helpful with his depth understanding of the psychological aspect of language and language others people. I know when I grew up in India, English speaking always created a different kind of hierarchy, different kind of prestige, and it always othered the ones who did not speak it. So to be aware of that. So now language and the cultural identity. Language creates the cultural identity. Here I'm talking linguist Braj Kach, who talks about English in India belongs to what he describes as the inner, outer, and expanding circle. So here in India, the language belongs both to the outer and expanding. He says these three circles then bring to English a unique pluralism and a linguistic heterogeneity and diversity which are unrecorded to this extent in human history. So this is something that gives us hope that actually already extremely plural India is enriched by this language when we use it effectively and consciously. So why I'm saying that this understanding of language and cultural identity is important, but in the end, dissolution of identity, which is the goal of Indic mind sciences, to create a confident student, a confident citizen of the globe, is vital. We recognize that this is how the language is playing all kinds of games, but we could use it to our advantage. So now, this is where I like to go to my personal story, how English has helped me deconstruct myself. And I'm saying there is always paradox that I have understood, and is a very famous line from Immanuel Kant, "What is enlightenment?" That as elsewhere, when things are considered in broad perspective, a strange, unexpected pattern in human affairs reveals itself. One in almost everything is paradoxical. So So I'm giving this quote, but I will go to the methods that are actually indicated from the age of European Enlightenment. You know what he says, that enlightenment is man's emergence from a self-imposed immaturity. So this immaturity, if we walk into the global scene with this immaturity, then we'll fall into the traps, the imperial traps that language can bring us into. Now, I was fortunate, and like many Indians, we speak many languages, and I think my own trilingual abilities have been crucial to walk in and out of identities. So understanding this, that it is a paradox. On the one hand, the language was forced upon us, and it has done a lot of harm too, but at the same time, its opposite also happens, and we can use it for developing this other sense. So I now begin my focus on my own travels, and I'm remembering my very first travel beyond where I was growing up. I was, teaching at Allahabad University. I was a young PhD student there, and my very first conference, which was All India English Teachers Conference in Trivandrum in 1983, and I recall Raja Rao was one of the guest speakers. And it was in that first travel, since India is a subcontinent, every, even a little bit of travel beyond one's own place shows what a powerful multilingual civilization is. And again, it was the use of English that made me be able to talk to people in Kerala, because I do not speak any of the southern languages. So I begin with this traveling beyond the self, that whatever my own personal situation was, it is through that traveling that I became aware of the vast world of India itself. So, and it was very interesting that my paper, this was my very first paper, it was called Beckett's Endgame, a Zen Utterance. And that I started that essay by saying, to label Beckett's Endgame as a Zen utterance might smack of being irresponsibly impressionistic, and yet let me risk it. So here I am kind of going back to my young self, how that very first paper, and going to the sub-tip of India, I began unconsciously traveling beyond the narrow boundaries of the self and taking risks with one's own journey, because it is always a risk taking to go beyond that comfort zone. And today, after all this time, I am actually, it's very strange that I was invoking Zen. Today I am a Vajrayana and Shakta practitioner, and right now I'm doing my sabbatical work on Gnostic Christianity and Western esoteric paths, which wouldn't have been possible if I did not leave that narrow identity. So this is why I'm invoking my very first rather long travel in India. And I looked up, since the web gives us all kinds of information, today, actually, this year, the same conference was scheduled to meet in Bodh Gaya in February. So thinking about my young self's first engagement with Zen, and the ancient legacy that your principal note invokes, we needs to be utilized as we consider teaching a language that is not exactly native. So how do we use those ancient methods? So the Buddha's message in the Pragya and Karuna, wisdom and compassion, skillful means. So when we are teaching this language, it is vital to invoke that understanding and develop the skillful means. So this conference, probably I do not know if it actually happened because of COVID, but it was meeting in Bodh Gaya. So the reason I started with the image of Buddha's travels, because Buddha's travels were breaking all borders. So if this is a little bit from an essay, Footprints in the Dust, Buddha's Travels in India. So the Venerable Dhammika writes, Shakyamuni had a still heart, but a very mobile body. Very, very important today. How do we develop a still heart and travel with the use of a language with a complete awareness of its imperial background? Now, so in keeping with the rules laid down by himself and in accordance with long-established Samana tradition, the Buddha spent 3 months of the rainy season in one location and the rest of the year on what were called walking tours. So Buddha spoke many languages. This is the writer is citing the Tripitaka that Buddha did after his Intl was to embark on a long journey in order to teach others what he had discovered. Equally significantly, his instruction to his first 5 disciples was that they should wander forth to teach others what he had taught them. His wanderings covered an area roughly equivalent to 200,000 square kilometers, a huge area. And it is very likely that apart from his mother tongue, which would have been a dialect of Koshala, he was probably fluent in several other languages, even though we think that he spoke in Pali, but we do not really know. Now I'm invoking this Banyan hologram created by the Japanese. We know the destruction of the 6th century sculpture here, but we ourselves in India need to resurrect the Buddha in his own land to serve the downtrodden and the disadvantaged without abandoning our global connection via this language of this English language. So this one I'm not going to go into. Again, I'm invoking the power of plural truths, the power of something that is, when we speak many different languages, we live in different cultures. And this is a quote from the philosopher Feuerbach, who says the truth of the plural, the truth of polytheism is again affirmed and the truth of monotheism is denied. So we do not want to focus on this singular identity of English speaking. We need to understand that how we could really, really develop and understand that the same word is used in many different ways and we inhabit plural identities. So this is how we travel beyond the single identity to something more expansive. So this brings me to my own writing, and since it's a diasporic experience that led me to write this book, my first book in the beginning is Desire, Tracing Kali's Footprints in Indian Literature. So how I discovered what I call the gynocentric matrix, because in the United States, my gendered and racialized identity was thrown at me, and I had to return and understand. And in the very process of writing that book, I found the dissolution of identity, which led me to my next foray into the world of monotheism. And it's very fascinating that, again, remaining quite rooted in my own tradition, I was able to travel beyond that self. And English has been the vehicle of expression of that self that ultimately does not exist according to Buddhist wisdom. So now I come to some of the travels, and the most recent was actually in Egypt. And it was a surprising, a joyful experience that how language is not a barrier to the soul. So just recently in Egypt, I was deeply struck by a young Egyptian woman telling me that her favorite Indian film is Amar Akbar Anthony. It's an old film, but it talks about this plural India. So many different religions, so many different traditions coexist, which of course is threatened by extremism in many instances. So our conversation happened in halting English, and a wonderful communion took place in a Bedouin camp next to Mount Sinai and an ancient Greek Orthodox monastery. So I wouldn't have been able to really truly create this kind of understanding if I had not really left behind the narrow identity of the self and truly participate in a global harmony. So the other thing I want to probably focus on, and a lot of non-native speakers, including me, aware of different kinds of accents. I still recall when I first started to teach, my mentor said that how I had to change my accent so that, of course, as a teacher, you want to make sure that the students understand you, but it is always a challenge. Say that there's so many different Englishes, so many different accents, and even within England, you see so many different accents. And sometimes, that can be detrimental because people, right from your accent, people can figure out your social status. So language is one of the most important ways we become human, but language can also imprison us. So we need to become very aware that in our multilingual civilization in India, that we have the capacity for freedom, and we need to recognize through skillful means that the teachers need to find how to do that with their students. So this brings me to the current world situation. Why is it that we need to pay attention to the Anthropocene, to pay attention to the global climate crisis and the polluted world? It has polluted our own selves also. So I'm invoking a Buddhist term, which Buddhist world knows is better than the other worlds. It is called the hungry ghosts, pretas in Sanskrit, which means that insatiable part of us that remains miserable amid plenty. Indeed, it is a sorry and diseased state of affairs under an economic system within whose structures the pollution and devastation of the planet is inherent. So Bert Oliver's essay, Nature, Capitalism, and the Future of Humankind, argues that happiness is forbidden under capitalism, being replaced by sensation and craving. So the reason I'm invoking this, because today we cannot simply teach a language as a skill. We need to understand that it is also inherent in an ideology. The ideology also spread through a global language of consumption, which is detrimental to our collective survival. It is detrimental to our overall mental, emotional, physical health. So recognize that yes, we can use the language, but use it to develop our awareness beyond the self and towards the planet as a whole. So as we can see, that the ideology of imperialism, it has led to conspicuous consumption, and we also consume education, we also consume language. It has led to incredible imbalance in the world. And then finally, the world of machines. So communion with the machine. Fortunately, it is this machine that is connecting me to you right now. However, you might have heard about the film Social Dilemma. It presents an existential threat. The technology can pose an existential threat. So we need to use technology, but not become, trapped by it either. And this is where I'm invoking a wonderful, wonderful writer, a historian, Yuval Noah Harari, who talks about that from humanism we have reached dataism. Because think about it. If we are not aware of ourselves, everything we do on social media, everything we do on our computers can be hacked and used against us. So, and fortunately, he talks about let's hack ourselves. But how do we do that? He goes to India. He learns Vipassana meditation. So again, invoking the Buddha. So if we have to create a 21st century, civilized world, if we have to understand how to save ourselves from this destructive modernity, destructive economic system, and not fall into its trap, because he is prophesying that very soon there will be a huge useless class because machines will take over. If machines take over and we are useless class, we cannot imagine what that will lead to. So he invokes, that we can hack ourselves. We can know ourselves by using, meditation techniques. So now I'm looking at the entire global situation. There is a wonderful global oneness project which actually lets us become aware of diverse languages and cultures. But what is very important here, that understanding that our mother tongue is actually pre-rational, and hence natural ethic is embedded in it, that Spivak talks about. So it is extremely important that we use the mother tongue, we understand the language of the people, and then expand it towards English. But simply speaking the mother tongue is not enough. So by becoming bilingual and trilingual, we can access the world differently. Whenever we are walking in and out of our own, identity through the use of language, we can walk into the space of the other. So if you recall the article by that Black English of Baldwin, that language actually others. But if we are aware, we can walk into the space of the other and not use the language for oppressive purposes that I know happens with English. So at this point, then, I'm actually talking about a paper I had written about awakening intelligence. So today we need to develop an education for a planetary consciousness. And we cannot focus too much on the self and identity, because dissolution of an identity is an evolutionary imperative right now. Otherwise, we will self-destruct on the planet. So this brings us to the situation today, this coronavirus, which is communicating with us. And it is again that paradox. Strangely, we have been sent back home. It's time out. But in a portal, Arundhati Roy has talked about how a portal is open right now for transformation, both for the teachers and the taught. So we need to go home, go within, and seek reality. Use the language to discover the self that exists in relationships only. So this is my final slide, that how English and travel beyond a narrow self it simply is, some of it is totally my own personal journey, which has brought me to this point. So to conclude, knowledge of a global English is a double-edged sword. And my own experience with the languages has helped me travel beyond a narrow identity. But we need to, when we think about, since that's the subject I was given, English as a global connector, but what are we connecting? We need to become aware that what exactly are we connecting? Is it simply business, simply oppressive power, or is there some other understanding of the language? So at this crucial juncture, then teaching of English for global communication must be nuanced and should not be given a hierarchy that stunts the growth of native languages. And if serving the disadvantaged and promoting awareness of ecological and environmental issues are the goals, teachers of English must become self-aware and reach deep within their own cultural treasures to find skillful and compassionate means to create a confident and creative student community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Neela ma'am. Really a very informative session. There is a question. Since we are running out of time, I will take only one question. Can you elaborate Braj Kachru's 3-circle of English model?
Okay. Again, since I'm not a linguist, I do not know the details of it. He says there's an inner, outer, and expanding circle. So from inner, of course, those are native speakers of English, right? You can read the article. He uses a very famous language, and there's details about that. And then it goes beyond. It's an outer circle of different kinds of people. And then this expanding circle, that's the global thing. Where the language becomes, a different understanding of language, which is when it is no longer a narrow, inner circle. Because then it is, so think about it, in India, English is not a foreign language, right? And then in many other places where people are learning it for purposes, for global businesses, then it has this expanding circle. So yes, it has all these details, but I'm not familiar with the entire aspect of it, so I won't be able to answer fully.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. That's all for question and answer session. On the behalf of the whole organizing committee, I extend my gratitude for the very informative session. I appreciate your effort of using innovative idea of incorporating the mission and vision of our college, that is Government Ramajan Rai College, in your talk. That was really very nice. I really appreciate your efforts. The session was really very riveting. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for listening to me.
Now moving to vote of thanks. Feeling gratitude and not expressing it is like wrapping the gift and not giving it. At this juncture, I am full of feeling of gratitude. Propose the vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to thank